Hey, what's up guys? In this video, you're gonna see me replace an old glass sliding patio door at my parents' house. Now, this thing was installed in the 1960s and it was definitely time to upgrade this door. It had gotten very hard to slide over the years, and one of the things that my parents wanted in a new door was a handle on both sides. As you can see, this old door does not have one on the outside, which makes it pretty tough to open. In addition to that, the only way that it will stay shut is by using this rare earth magnet that is so beautifully duct taped to the door. There's no denying that after 60 some years, it's time to get this door swapped out with something a little newer. So let's get going. Okay guys, so I had to get this old door out of here, so the first thing I did was just start removing the trim around the door frame on the interior. Now, I tried to do this very carefully because my plan was to reuse this trim once the new door was installed. As you can see, this room has some very old wood paneling on the walls, and all of the trim matches that paneling. Now, if I was to just replace the trim with new trim, it would be incredibly hard to match the exact color just because of the age of the trim and the way the wood naturally colors with time. So the game plan here is what I like to call a delicate demo. I just used a trim removal tool and took my time removing each piece. Once the interior trim was removed, I got to work on removing the exterior trim. Now, the first thing I did was take a utility knife and cut around all of the caulking where the vinyl was attached. Removing the vinyl did take some time. This was one of those things where initially I tried to salvage the vinyl, but eventually I realized it was not going to be salvageable. And once I got to that point mentally, then the demo went a lot faster. Next up, I decided to go ahead and get these old doors removed. To do this, I took my drill and I used it to raise the wheels on the bottom of the door. Now, there's a little screw at the bottom of the door on each side where you can make these adjustments. Once the wheels were raised high enough, we just pried the doors up off the track and carefully carried them away. Now, this was definitely a team effort because these doors are pretty heavy and it's good to have a couple people handling them so they don't break and shatter glass everywhere. Now, the frame for the old sliding doors were held in place with some screws that were screwed through the metal frame into the house. So the first thing we had to do was go along the perimeter of the door frame and remove any and all screws that we could find. With the screws removed, the frame pieces should just pop right out.
They don't let me use power tools often.
This is why.
Okay.
You always strip the screw. Look at them socks.
Huh?
Look at them socks.
The cat socks.
That's where I get it from. Crazy socks.
Yep.
It was at this point where I realized that the board above the door frame was not actually attached to anything. And thankfully I avoided getting knocked out by it, but it still surprised me pretty good. There was one piece left from the old door frame, and that was the piece at the bottom. And I gotta be honest, this piece did not want to come off. It was a battle, but ultimately a battle I won by sheer force. Most of the screws were rusted or stripped out. I hit them with a little WD-40 hoping to loosen them up, but ultimately the only way I was able to get this track off was just prying it up enough so that the metal bent around the screw. And once the track was off, I just used a crowbar to remove the screws. Like I said, a battle. But with that, the old doors were completely removed and we could start getting our frame prepped for the new door. Before we could do anything, I wanted to dry fit the door and basically just see if it was even gonna fit. And to my disappointment, I discovered that it wasn't going to in its current state. So there were some adjustments that I was going to have to make before it would fit. I mean, what is a project without some setbacks? Unfortunately, for a project like this, I was racing against the clock because I didn't want to leave a giant hole in my parents' house for too long. So these little setbacks added a little extra time to the install, but they had to be done. The first thing that I had to do was remove an extra board on one of the sides of the door frame because the new door was just a little too wide with it in place. The other little setback had to do with these white nailing flanges that were on each side of the door. Now, this is how you're supposed to attach the door to the house, but they just weren't going to work for our particular situation. Our door opening would just not accommodate attaching the door using these flanges, so we had to remove them. Now, these flanges are just vinyl, so using a utility knife to cut them would have been much better here rather than the angle grinder my husband used because, well, that just created way too much unnecessary dust. My next step was to put some flashing tape around the perimeter of the door. Well, at least that was my plan when I started this project. I had a strong inclination that there wouldn't be any flashing tape on this particular door frame since it was installed in the 1960s. So I figured if I'm taking the time to replace it, then I'll add a little extra protection by installing some flashing tape around the door frame. However, the local hardware store near my parents did not have any flashing tape in stock, and I couldn't afford to spend time driving over an hour to Lowe's or Home Depot when there was a massive hole in their house, so I didn't get any flashing tape for this install. But I did end up getting some of this moisture-resistant waterproofing tape that they had at the hardware store. I think it was like Gorilla Glue brand. Honestly, I have no clue if this stuff works or is necessary, but I figured I would cover the door frame in it to hopefully just protect the wood a little bit more. I will say the wood was in really good shape after all those years. There was no signs of previous water damage. There is a good size awning over the doors, so I think that helps prevent a lot of moisture exposure. Anyways, all that to say, use flashing tape if you can on an install like this. Alright, it's finally time to get the new doors installed. I laid down some exterior grade silicone caulking prior to setting the door frame in place. Now, our first goal was just to get it in the frame and see if we needed to level it any. Luckily, the door frame being one solid piece meant that it was nice and level and square. We just had to check if it was level on the bottom or if it needed to be shimmed. Luckily, it was dead on. From there, we worked on getting the door lined up and flush with the interior walls. Now, at this point, my brother had showed up and offered to help, which was much appreciated because the sun was starting to set, so we really need to get these doors fully installed. To get the doors flush with the interior walls, we just nailed some shims to the wall to use as guides of where the door needed to sit. Then we cut some boards to size to fill in the gap that was at the top of the doors since the old doors were just a little bit taller. Once that gap was filled, we placed the sliding door on its track and adjusted the rollers at the bottom of the door so that they would slide easily. Once we had everything where we needed it to be, then we worked on attaching the door frame to the house itself. Now, we had to do this a little bit differently because we removed those nail flanges, remember? I would say we had to do it differently than the instructions called for, but this door actually arrived without a single instruction. How convenient, huh? So to attach the door to the house, I just countersunk some holes into the new door frame and attached screws on each of my 4 sides. I probably used somewhere between 6 and 8 screws per side, and I made sure to place shims everywhere that I attached a screw if there was any sort of gap between the new door frame and the existing opening. With my door fully attached, I used my multi-tool to trim all of the shims down flush with the wall. Next, we had to install the handles for the door. Now, this was a fairly self-explanatory process. The handle is just attached with screws, and it came with another piece that just screws into the frame of the door, which just allows it to lock. Next up, we worked on adding back that interior trim that I so delicately removed earlier. Now, because this door was a little shorter, we did end up having to add another piece of trim here up top, but we ended up painting it black just to sort of blend with the color of the door frame. With the interior trim now installed, I added some of this minimal expanding gap foam specifically designed for windows and doors from the outside. Now, as you can see, I had to break out the flashlight here since night had fallen on me and I really needed to get this done. My goal was just to get any of the gaps filled before I left for the day, and then I would come back the next day and finish trimming everything out and get it fully sealed up. Alright, so I didn't exactly make it back there the very next day like I'd planned, so when I did show back up, my mom and dad had already trimmed out the exterior of the door like this. And I think they did a really nice job too. Way to go, guys. I'm proud. Okay, now there's the matter of putting a new board here since we didn't take this board out, and I don't know if you can really see, but there's a bit of a gap here from where this step meets the bottom of this door frame, and so that's kind of a trip hazard. So what I want to do is basically put a board here on top of this that'll bring me level to this, so this is not a trip hazard here. Now this old bottom sill was actually in pretty good shape, although the paint had worn off of it pretty bad. My plan was to basically just wrap this old board in some new pressure treated lumber to bring the step flush with the door frame, as well as cover up the hideousness of this old red board. To get started, I just took a measurement of the existing sill, and then I went and cut down my 2x8 board to the correct length on the miter saw. Then all I had to do was get this thing installed over the top of the other board and I'd be done. But hold on a sec, it doesn't fit because of that trim that was installed. So I guess I'm gonna need to notch this board. You see, I actually already knew that, which is why I got one of these contour gauge tools. Now, this is the first time I've actually ever used something like this, so let's see if it works. Now, typically I would have just installed the bottom board first and then installed the rest of the trim on top, but they did such a good job installing all of that exterior trim that I didn't want to make them take it down. So we'll work with what we got by using this little contour tool to notch my board on both sides. This little tool got me pretty close to the shape that I needed to notch out. I did have to fine tune it a little bit to get it as close to perfect as I could. And anywhere that wasn't totally flush would just be filled in with some silicone caulking anyways. To attach the new board, I just laid down some construction adhesive and then added a couple of screws. Next, I caulked around the entire perimeter of the door frame with some silicone caulking. Now, I took my time here and made sure that I sealed up any visible gaps that I could see. Lastly, we added another piece of trim to finish covering up that old red bottom sill, and with that, this door was fully installed. This new door is a huge upgrade from that old 1960s sliding door. One of the biggest upgrades with this new door is the built-in blinds, which is something that they were really excited about. Overall, I'd say this door install was a pretty simple project, but I would definitely recommend not to try and tackle it on your own. Even one other person's help on a project like this would go a long way. And that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, maybe learned some things along the way. Thanks so much for watching and following along as I tackled another project. I'll be seeing you guys again soon for my next video. Bye.